Well, John, you have expressed your desire to know something about how life was when I grew up as a boy. Well, I assure you it wasn't easy, so here goes. Back in the good old days, as I'm sure you've had some old-timers say, well, I'm not too sure about how good it was. I guess it all depends on how you look at it. Maybe it was because you could buy eggs for 10 cents a dozen, buy bread for 5 cents a loaf. You buy a 24-pound of flour in them days for 45 cents, but the catch was who had 45 cents. You see, most people in those days had a little patch of ground, an acre or two, and proceeded to grow what they had to eat. Our little farm consisted of about 42 acres. About half of that was hillside, and all work had to be done by hand with the help of a team of bulky horses. Tractors weren't in when I was a kid. There were one or two around with large iron wheels. They were propelled by steam, and only the rich like the Joneses could afford one. So you see, we had to do most of our farming the hard way. Before I get too far along with farming, though, I will say that I was one of 12 children, 8 boys and 4 girls. I was in the middle, 5 older and 6 younger. So we, or I should say, Mom and Dad, instituted what is called the hand-me-down method. Whatever the oldest child didn't wear out, it was handed down to the next, till it was completely gone, patches and all. So you can see having new clothes was out of the question, but we didn't seem to mind too much, for most everybody else was in the same boat. I can imagine it was somewhat like joining a nudist camp. Once you get used to it, you don't mind. Looking back, I can sort of compare myself as living in what you might consider a semi-nude situation. Because my pants had more holes and patches in the wrong places than a sieve that had been thrown in a thrashing machine. Adding a little comedy to the situation, I can remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I delighted in throwing rocks at hornets' nests and bees' nests, as they build many times in the trees or around old buildings. Well, there just happened to be at this particular time when the seat of my pants was worn out, and I mean worn out. My behind was shining like a new moon, but there was this big bee's nest built under the eaves of the old barn. And being the kid that I was, I picked up a handful of pebbles and began tossing them at the nest. Well, the bees would come out to see what was going on, and when I saw one heading my way, I would duck around the corner of the barn until they settled down. Then I would slip back around and do the same thing again. Well, after a while, the bees got wise. They posted a few sentries on the outside of the nest to see what was going on. So this time I peeked around the corner, and I kind of hesitated because from past experiences I knew what they were up to. And after a short time, I finally got up enough courage to dart out front and throw another gravel in their direction and head for the corner of the barn. But this time I didn't make it. The dive bombers knew exactly where the bare spot was in the seat of my pants. And needless to say, I let everybody know where I was as I took off for the house, hollering, "Oh, oh, oh, oh," expecting to get a little sympathy, but was greeted with a little hickory tea, if you know what I mean instead. Well, in case you don't know, as a hint, I had to sit down real easy for the next 3 or 4 days until the soreness dissipated. Getting back to farming, we all had our chores to do. Older ones looked after feeding the stock, while us younger ones kept the coal buckets full of coal and the water buckets full of water and wood in the wood box to keep the fires burning. We had no gas or electricity when I was a kid. We finally got electricity when I was about 14 years old. But back in my boyhood days, you were taught to do things early in life. I remember before I was big enough to lift up a plow, Dad taught me how. One day when I was out in the field with him, he turned me loose with the plow, team of horses. And I was doing pretty good until Plow hit a rock in the ground and turned over, and I couldn't lift it up, so I began to cry. Dad came up and patted me on the head and said, "Here, I will show you how to make the horses lift it up." So he took over the reins and said, "Get up," to the horses. And as they began to pull, he reached down and got hold of the handle of the plow with one hand, and it set right up. So you learn a lot of little tricks to make life easier through experience if you are willing to listen to what others teach you. Well, looking back on life, I thought I had a real tough life growing up. I still think it was pretty tough, but I also had a lot of good times, especially with my dad when hunting time came around. I remember very well when it snowed enough to track a rabbit. After the morning chores were finished, he would get me all bundled up and reach upon the wall and get his old single-barrel shotgun and take me rabbit hunting. He taught me how to tell which way the rabbit was going by the tracks in the snow. When we spotted one sitting in the weeds or brush, he would let me scare it out for him. He never liked to shoot one sitting in the bed, and if he ever missed, then he would let me follow the tracks and trails while he stayed close to where the rabbit first jumped up, for he said most always they would come back around where they first jumped. And they do. So you might say he used me as his dog. But I enjoyed it. It reminded me, John, when you got big enough to follow me around, and I bought you a little .410 shotgun and started you out hunting rabbits and squirrels, and you did real good. And I was kind of proud of you, and still am. Now that's what I call the good old days, when families can enjoy doing things together. Well, here comes the sad part of life. Dad never was too well, as far as I can remember. He had his good days and his bad days. He passed away when I was 16 years old. Life was never the same. I was in the 8th grade and had to quit school to take care of the farm, and my older brothers were getting married and on their own. I had to try to keep things going on the farm and look after the younger ones until they were able to run the farm on their own. And when this happened, I got a job at the mines making $2.56 a day, working 9 hours a day. And I don't think you could make it on that. Well, to continue my story of growing up, I want you to know that my parents were very strict. They wanted their kids to obey and respect them as parents. They believed very much in what the Bible says. That is, spare the rod and spoil the child. Well, I'll tell you, if I live to be 100 years old, and I'm well on my way now, I'll never spoil, because the rod has cured me for years to come. Well, I can now truthfully say them was the good old days, because they taught me right from wrong, and that's more than I can say for a lot of parents today. 11 p.m. was a limit for us kids to stay out, barring no excuses, until we were 21 years old, or up until Dad passed away. So you see, we didn't have time to get into trouble. So we also had a lot of good times together. We had a lot of fun of piling in the old wagon or two-seated buggy, which Dad had, and headed for grandmother's house on the weekend. She always had a lot of cookies and good things to eat, which we all enjoyed very much. For fun, when we had a little time to spare, we played games like cat and mouse, marbles, hide and seek. Mostly by ourselves, we were rolling wheels, jumping straddle of an old broomstick, running up and down the path like you make out like you was riding a horse, beating yourself on your thighs and legs with a switch until they were black and blue. Well, kids just don't play those games today, needless to say why. But as I look back on life, I sure do miss those good old days. I especially like running through the woods, chasing chipmunks, climbing to the top of little saplings and swinging back and forth like a totem pole, and then letting your feet swing free and riding the top of the tree to the ground. Now that was fun. Until one time the top snapped off and me and the tree came tumbling down. Well, that about ended that sport and me as well, as it really bruised my anatomy and a few other things as well. Well, next we fixed up the old buggy, which had wore its seats out and the top was all torn off, and me and some of the neighbors' kids and my brothers took the old chassis, patched it up. On the weekends we would push it up the hill by the house. All of us pile on that could hold on anywhere and turn it loose down the hill. Needless to say, by the way, many of us fell off and got bruised up, but we dared not cry because we knew that that would be the end of our buggy rides. Many times we went to school with so many scratches on our body, which was patched up by iodine. We looked like a person with smallpox or something and had to spend a lot of time explaining what happened to us. I guess they thought probably we were nuts. Well, to make life a little easier for me, Mom finally remarried and I met a wonderful girl who really changed my life. And I'll tell you why. It caused me to walk 26 miles one way on the weekends to see her. Just it didn't seem to bother me too much because I thought I was in my second heaven. And I whistled and sang all the way. Well, to make a long story short, we decided to get married, which we did, and that ended my 25-mile hikes. We had our ups and downs in life, but God has blessed us with 4 wonderful children, which we still love and enjoy having them around, and for this I am thankful. As I look back on life, I can see that the joys I have now with my family more than compensates for what I considered bad times with the bumps and grinds of growing up, and I praise the Lord for you all. It was hard work growing up in my day back on the farm, but as I look back now, I don't think I would want to change anything. Bad times taught me how to enjoy the good times. And as far as history is concerned, I can truthfully say I've seen it all. Changed right before my eyes. And I am very fortunate in having a part in the old and the new. As far as transportation is concerned, I have traveled in all modes of transportation. Horseback riding, riding on sleds, riding on wagons and trains and airplanes. I have lived in the greatest dispensation in history of all time. From the horse and buggy days, what is now known as the rocket age. Yes, I've seen it all, and for this I am grateful. And looking back, I don't think I would want to change a thing. So I hope this little talk will give you a little more insight into what has happened in my lifetime. So I will sign off for now. There.